Welcome back, class. Today I am going to show you how to factor a polynomial by grouping. And you use this method if the polynomial has 4 terms. Let's get started. We want to factor the polynomial x to the third minus 3x squared minus 16x plus 48 completely. And once again, because we have 4 terms, we're going to use factoring by grouping. So I want to start off by rewriting the problem. We have x to the third minus 3x squared minus 16x plus 48. When you factor by grouping, what you do is you group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Once you've grouped them, you want to factor from each group. In the first group, we have x to the third minus 3x squared. Let's go ahead and pull out the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor in the first group is x squared. X squared times x is x to the third. X squared times negative 3 is negative 3x squared. Now let's factor out the GCF from the second group. In the second group, the greatest common factor is 16. Because 16 goes into both 16 and 48. However, I'll go ahead and factor out a negative 16, so then that way my x value becomes positive. So negative 16 times x is negative 16x. Negative 16 times negative 3 is 48. When you're factoring by grouping, another goal is to get the same binomials. Notice how we have x minus 3 and x minus 3. Because these binomials are the same, that means that we're on the right path. If these binomials were different, then there's 2 cases. We either did something wrong or the polynomial's not factorable. But because these are the same, that means that we're doing our work correctly. So now let's go ahead and take the x minus 3's and factor them out. When you factor them out, you're only going to write them out once. So we have x minus 3, and our second factor is going to be whatever's left over. And what's left over is the x squared minus 16. But we're not done. Notice how the x squared minus 16 is a difference of 2 squares. So let's go ahead and take this a step further. Let's factor out x squared minus 16. When factoring a difference of squares, we know that the binomials are going to look exactly the same, but the signs will be different. So one will be positive and the other one will be negative. I know x times x is x squared, and 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. So now that we've factored x squared minus 16 completely, let's go ahead and bring down the x minus 3. So our final answer is x minus 3 times x plus 4 times x minus 4. Now I know what you're wondering. You're probably wondering why I only wrote x minus 3 once and not as x minus 3 squared. So let me give you some background. Note, if I ask you to factor x squared times a, now I'm going to replace x minus 3 with a, minus 16 times a, how would you factor that? How would you factor the binomial? Well, what you would do is you would factor out the GCF, which in this case is a, and pull it aside. Okay, so a times x squared is x squared a, and a times negative 16 will give you that negative 16a. So notice how when we wrote out a, we only wrote it out once. Okay, we didn't raise it to the second power because we just factored it out. We're using the distributive property, but backwards. Same concept is going to apply for x minus 3. It's just x minus 3, not x minus 3 squared, because x minus 3 is the GCF. Now let's look at example 3b. In example 3b, I need to factor the polynomial 12v to the third plus 3v squared plus 32v plus 8 completely. Let me go ahead and rewrite the problem. So because we have 4 terms, we're going to use factoring by grouping. So let me go ahead and put parentheses around the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. So class, now we're going to factor out the GCF from each group. The biggest number that goes into both 12 and 3 is 3. The smallest variable from the first group is v squared. 3v squared times 4v is 12v to the third. And 3v squared times 1 is 3v squared. Now let's factor out the GCF from the second group. In the second group, 32 and 8 are both divisible by 8. 8 times 4v is 32v, and 8 times 1 is 8. So now that these are the same, that tells us that we're on the right path. So let's go ahead and factor them out. If they're not the same, then we either did something wrong or the polynomial is not factorable. So let's write out 4v plus 1. And the second factor is going to be whatever's left over. And what's left over is 3v squared plus 8. Now since 4v plus 1 is not factorable and 3v squared plus 8 is not factorable, this tells me that we're finally done. We've factored the problem completely. So that's how you factor a polynomial by grouping. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe.